Imagine a man responsible for leading over 2 million people through the desert, without water, without food, without GPS, only with a promise. Now imagine that these people constantly complain, repeatedly attempt to overthrow his leadership, and frequently long to return to the slavery they once knew. This is Moses, and what he did thousands of years ago contains the secret that can transform any marginalized community today. What if the greatest leaders in the peripheries were ignoring the most powerful model of leadership in history? What if the techniques Moses used to transform mistreated slaves into a mighty nation were exactly what our most vulnerable communities need today? Moses not only freed a people, he converted a mindset of slavery into a vision of nationhood. He transformed hopeless individuals into conquerors, and he did so while facing some of the most difficult people in biblical history. In this video, I will reveal how Moses transformed constant rebellion into motivation to move forward, implemented a leadership system that multiplied his impact, and used a surprising method to turn critics into allies. Stay tuned until the end to discover the most powerful technique Moses used to turn rebels into leaders, a strategy that is rarely taught but could revolutionize any work within challenged communities. The story of Moses is far more than a biblical account of a people's liberation. It is a leadership manual written in the desert, tested under the most adverse circumstances possible. Consider this. Moses had to lead people who had been enslaved for generations. People without their own identity, without self-esteem, without a vision for the future. People who, at the first obstacle, wanted to return to the safety of slavery rather than face the risks of freedom. It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert, they said. Does that mindset sound familiar? Isn't it exactly what we see in many marginalized communities today? Talented individuals who, due to a lack of hope and opportunities, prefer the security of the familiar, even if oppressive, instead of venturing into new paths. But what really made Moses overcome the constant complaints and rebellions? How did he manage to transform a people who murmured at every difficulty into a community capable of conquering territories and establishing a nation? And the question that intrigued me the most: what is the secret to turning hopeless individuals into prosperous communities that become protagonists of their own story? Moses' journey in the desert offers us surprising answers that can be applied today in urban peripheries, settlements, riverside communities, and anywhere there are leaders committed to real transformation. To understand the brilliance of Moses' leadership, we must first comprehend his unique formation. God prepared Moses in an extraordinary way. He was educated as a prince in Pharaoh's palace, learning strategy, administration, and military leadership. Then, he spent 40 years as a shepherd in the Midian desert, developing patience, resilience, and intimacy with God. This combination, knowledge of the dominant culture coupled with a profound connection to nature and to God, gave Moses a unique perspective. He was able to understand both the oppressive system and the path to freedom. When he finally accepted the call to lead the people out of Egypt, Moses faced his first great challenge: leading people without identity and with a mindset of slavery. People molded by oppression, who knew only to obey under the lash. Imagine the scene. After the plagues and the dramatic exodus from Egypt, the people find themselves cornered before the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army rapidly approaches. The immediate reaction? Panic and accusation. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the desert? Why did you treat us this way, taking us out of Egypt? Exodus 14:11. At this critical moment, we see the first principle of Moses' leadership in the peripheries: the courage to take a stand when everyone else sees only impossibilities. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. Just be still. Exodus 14:13-14. The crossing of the Red Sea was more than a miracle. It was a defining moment that began to transform that people's identity. They witnessed the impossible happening, and that planted the first seed of hope. But transformation is not instantaneous. Soon, the first practical crises arose: a lack of potable water in Mara, food shortages in the Sim Desert. With every difficulty, the pattern repeated itself. The people murmured, complained, and idealized the past in Egypt. If only we had died at the hand of the Lord in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate as much bread as we wanted. Exodus 16:3. This idealization of an oppressive past is a phenomenon we repeatedly see in vulnerable communities. The difficulty in believing in a better future makes the past, even if painful, seem preferable. Here we see Moses developing another crucial aspect of his leadership: persistence in the face of ingratitude. While the people murmured, he continued interceding on their behalf, seeking solutions and keeping his focus on the future promise. The provision of manna and quail revealed another important dimension. Even when dealing with difficult people, Moses did not give up on meeting the community's basic needs. He understood that social transformation begins with ensuring fundamental necessities, a principle every community leader must embrace. Thus far, we have seen how Moses began to transform a people in bondage into a community with its own identity. He faced complaints, fear, and resistance to change, challenges that every community leader is all too familiar with. If you are enjoying this content and want to discover more biblical leadership principles applicable to today's reality, especially in challenging contexts, subscribe to the channel now. We have a series dedicated to biblical characters that offer powerful lessons for our contemporary dilemmas. And I want to know from you, have you ever faced difficult people in a leadership position? How did you handle the situation? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire other leaders facing similar challenges. As the journey in the desert continued, Moses began to feel the weight of leading alone. In Exodus 18, we witness a crucial moment when his father-in-law, Jethro, visits and observes his exhausting routine, judging the people's issues from dawn until dusk. Jethro offers advice that would revolutionize Moses' leadership. What you are doing is not good. You and your people will become utterly exhausted, for this task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Exodus 18, 17-18. Here we find one of the most powerful principles for any leader in the periphery: the ability to delegate and develop new leadership. Following Jethro's counsel, Moses implemented a structure of leaders overseeing groups of 10, 50, 100, and 1,000 people. This model of shared leadership is revolutionary for peripheral communities. How many social projects fail because they depend on a single charismatic leader? How many community initiatives vanish when their founder steps away? Moses teaches us that true social transformation requires the development of multiple layers of leadership. It is about identifying local talents, empowering them, and entrusting them with responsibilities. In modern terms, we speak of community protagonism and local empowerment. However, soon after this evolutionary moment in leadership, Moses would face his greatest challenge yet. While ascending Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law, the people, impatient with his absence, built a golden calf to worship. Imagine the scene. Moses descends the mountain after a profound encounter with God, carrying the tablets with the 10 Commandments, only to find the people in rampant idolatry. This episode reveals another crucial dimension of leadership: how to handle betrayal and apostasy. How do you react when those you lead abandon the values you tried to instill? Moses' response balanced justice with mercy. He did not ignore the gravity of the situation. He demanded repentance, and there were consequences for the rebellious leaders. But he also interceded intensely on behalf of the people, even offering his own life in exchange for their forgiveness. Now, forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. Exodus 32:32. This balance between firmness and compassion is essential for leaders in challenging contexts. In the peripheries, we often face situations where principles are violated and boundaries crossed. The temptation is to swing between two extremes: either rigidity that offers no room for recovery or permissiveness that fails to set clear limits. Moses demonstrates that truly transformative leadership maintains high standards while offering paths to restoration. He teaches us that it is possible to confront destructive behaviors without dehumanizing those who commit them. So far, we have seen powerful principles in Moses' leadership. The courage to stand firm when all others see only impossibilities. Persistence in the face of ingratitude. The importance of meeting the community's basic needs. The development of multiple layers of local leadership. The balance between justice and mercy when dealing with serious failures. These principles would already be sufficient to transform any work within peripheral communities. But Moses' journey has even more to teach us. Next, I will reveal how Moses dealt with the open rebellion of the leaders he himself had raised and how his strategies can revolutionize community leadership today. We will also see the one grave mistake that cost Moses his entry into the Promised Land, and how we can avoid falling into the same trap. Don't go anywhere, because these next principles are exactly what many community leaders are looking for to overcome their greatest challenges. As the journey in the desert advanced, Moses faced an even more dangerous form of opposition, rebellion from within his own leadership. In Numbers 16, we find the story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, men of position and influence who directly challenged the authority of Moses and Aaron. You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you set yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Numbers 16:3. This rebellion was cloaked in spiritual language and appeals for equality, making it particularly dangerous. It was not just a group complaining about food or water. It was an ideological challenge to the very leadership structure established by God. Today, in the peripheries, community leaders face similar challenges. People who, under seemingly noble banners such as horizontalism or representativeness, undermine structures that are functioning and creating positive impact. Moses' response to this challenge is profoundly instructive. First, he did not react impulsively. When he heard this, Moses fell on his face in prostration before the Lord. Numbers 16. For this act of prostration was not merely a religious gesture. It was a moment to seek clarity and wisdom before responding. Secondly, Moses did not attempt to defend himself personally. Instead, he proposed a test that would clearly reveal who truly possessed divine authority. Tomorrow the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy. Numbers 16:5. Here is a fundamental lesson for leaders in the periphery. When your authority is challenged, do not take it personally. Do not turn criticism into an ego battle. Instead, let the results of your work speak for themselves. The outcome of that rebellion was dramatic, with the earth opening up and swallowing the rebellious leaders. Although we cannot expect interventions so spectacular today, the principle remains: legitimate leadership, exercised with integrity and aligned with greater purposes, will eventually be vindicated. Even after this impressive demonstration of his authority, the next day, the people murmured again, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Numbers 16:41. This persistent resistance to change shows how difficult it is to transform deeply ingrained mindsets. Any leader working in vulnerable communities knows this reality. Even after significant achievements, there are always voices that resist, that idealize the past, that fear the new. Years later, Moses faced his own moment of failure. In Numbers 20, faced with the people's constant murmuring over a lack of water, God instructed Moses to speak to the rock so that water would flow from it. Instead, frustrated and irritated, Moses struck the rock twice, exclaiming, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Numbers 20:10. This moment of impatience and loss of emotional control cost Moses dearly. God said, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor my holiness in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Numbers 20:12. Here lies one of the most important lessons for any leader. Even the most experienced can be defeated by their own temperament when constantly under pressure. The wear and tear of leadership, especially in hostile environments, demands intentional self-care and spiritual renewal. For leaders in the peripheries, who frequently face criticism, resistance, and ingratitude, this lesson is vital. Burnout and frustration are real risks that can compromise years of solid work in a single moment of weakness. Just as the people of Israel lived between scarcity and promise, our peripheral communities also exist between what they are today and what they could become. And the quality of the leadership present in these spaces may determine which reality prevails. The challenges Moses faced, resistance to change, constant criticism, challenges to his authority, and the danger of emotional burnout, are also the challenges of community leaders today. His journey offers us not only inspiration, but practical strategies to confront these obstacles. If you're interested in more biblical examples of leadership applicable to our time, be sure to watch our video, What Joshua Teaches About Conquering Impossible Territories in Your Career, where we explore how Moses' successor managed to achieve what his mentor had only envisioned from afar. And remember to activate notifications so you don't miss the upcoming videos in the series, What the Bible Teaches About Contemporary Challenges. In the final years of his leadership, Moses demonstrated a profound understanding that many leaders only acquire late in life. Real transformation takes time, often longer than a single generation of leadership. After nearly 40 years in the desert, the people were finally ready to enter the Promised Land. But God revealed to Moses that he would not cross the Jordan. A new generation, led by Joshua, would complete the journey. Rather than harboring bitterness, Moses devoted his final months to preparing the people and his successor for the future. The book of Deuteronomy records his final speeches, true manuals on leadership, governance, and community life. These are the commandments, decrees, and laws that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, so that you may follow them in the land you are about to enter and possess. Deuteronomy 6:1. This intentional transfer of vision, values, and knowledge to the next generation carries a vital lesson for community leaders. Your greatest legacy will not be the buildings constructed or the programs implemented, but the people you develop. In the peripheries, we often see development cycles interrupted when projects depend on a single charismatic figure or temporary external funding. Moses teaches us the importance of institutionalizing values and practices that will outlive our personal leadership. Observe how he prepared Joshua, not only publicly designating him as a successor, but gradually sharing authority and experiences with him. The Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Present him to Eleazar the priest and to all the congregation, and commission him in their presence. Grant him part of your authority, so that all the Israelites may obey him." Numbers 27:18-20. This model of planned succession is revolutionary for work in vulnerable communities. How many promising initiatives vanish when their founder steps away? How many community projects die with the exit of a single leader? We also see in Moses' final discourse a comprehensive approach to building a just society. He addresses economics, social justice, governance, community rituals, conflict resolution, and care for the vulnerable. Every 3 years, set aside a tithe of all the produce from that year and store it in your towns. That portion is for the Levites, for the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows living in your town, so that they may eat and be satisfied. Deuteronomy 14:28-29. For leaders of NGOs, churches, and social movements in today's peripheries, this integral model of community development is profoundly relevant. It is not enough to address only education, or only housing, or only spirituality. Flourishing communities require a holistic vision that intertwines all these aspects. Finally, in the last chapters of Deuteronomy, we see Moses on Mount Nebo, gazing from afar at the promised land he would not enter. He dies there, having fulfilled his mission to transform slaves into a people, to pass on the vision to a new generation, and to establish structures that would outlast him. This is perhaps Moses' deepest lesson for community leaders. Sometimes, Our role is to initiate processes whose full fruits we will never see. As Martin Luther King Jr., inspired by Moses' experience, once said, "I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." Moses' journey as a leader offers us eternal principles that can transform any work in marginalized communities today. He taught us that true leadership begins with a clear vision of possibilities where others see only impossibilities. In the peripheries, where problems are often the only visible aspect, we need leaders who can envision potential and calling. We learn from Moses that effective leadership requires the intentional development of new leaders. It is not enough to do good. It is essential to empower others to multiply the impact. Just as he structured leaders in groups of 10, 50, 100, and 1,000, we must create systems that identify and develop the leadership potential present in every community. We saw how Moses balanced firmness with compassion, maintaining high standards while offering paths to restoration. This balance is crucial in vulnerable communities, where both excessive permissiveness and strict rigidity can be destructive. We observed how he dealt with criticism and opposition without taking it personally, without turning challenges into ego battles. His humility, the Bible describes him as the most humble man on earth, allowed him to focus on the mission above his own insecurities. And finally, we witnessed his wisdom in intentionally preparing the next generation to complete what he started, acknowledging that deep transformation often takes longer than a single lifetime of leadership. Just as Moses saw the promised land only from afar, many community leaders plant seeds whose full fruits they will never see. The school principal in a favela investing in children who will only transform the community decades later. The leader of a housing movement building the foundations for changes that will only materialize after his generation. The pastor disciplining young people who will impact areas he may never reach. This long-term perspective does not diminish our work, it dignifies it. Like Moses, we are part of a story greater than ourselves. When we look at our peripheral communities today, we must remember that, just like the people of Israel, these communities need not only material resources, although those are important. They need leaders like Moses, who see beyond current circumstances, who persist in the face of ingratitude, who develop new leadership, who balance justice and mercy, and who work with a vision that transcends their own generation. The murmurs Moses faced in the desert are not so different from the resistances we find in the favelas, in the hills, in occupations and settlements. And just as he transformed a people without identity into a nation with purpose, we too can, by the same divine grace, transform our marginalized communities into places of hope, dignity, and self-determination. The question I leave you with is, which part of Moses' legacy are you called to live out in your community today?